say for some, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. It all depends on where are you. Here in Latvia, in Riga, we are in the middle of a day. And we have some people in the audience, and the whole world is watching us online. Or maybe some even on television. I'm Valds Melders, and I'm a little hosting here to make sure that you know what we are doing, and maybe even sometimes why. So this is panel number 3 for today. Although it looks like we have only 2 panelists, but don't get carried away. This is phygital event, where some people are in physical appearance and others are online already ready. OTT regulation, the future of connectivity in the EU, because technology sometimes is already there. But then we are asking some questions on regulations, rules, and laws, and suddenly we see that it's much more complicated than just the technology. So let's see. There may not have been a single debate during 2022 that has been raging hotter than OTT regulation. So many questions to ask and answers to look for. The arguments range from a lack of regulatory clarity to the sustainability of current business models. What are they? Then questioning if services can be considered networks, because who has all the quotas and datas? And as well as the moral dilemma of what is considered fair and unfair in business. All these questions on this discussion panel. This very hard job will be taken on by Vice President and Principal Analyst of Networking and Security for More Insights and Strategy, also a contributor of Forbes. And please welcome moderator, Will Townsend.
Thank you, Val. It's always tough going on right after lunch, and people tend to fall asleep, and I'm an American, so it's about 5 a.m. my time, so I'll do my best there. But this is going to be a very, I think, provocative discussion. We have representation from all the different parties involved. Certainly, this isn't just an EU discussion from my perspective, it's a global consideration as well. And so before we jump into the topics, I do want to allow our panelists to spend some time, introduce themselves, provide an overview of what they do and their focus. Before we do that, let me start. As Val mentioned, my name is Will Townsend. I manage the networking and security practices for a technology analyst firm called More Insights and Strategy. We're based in the States, been around for about 10 years. And I'm very passionate about connectivity. In fact, I'm working on my first book. The working title is The Human Network, and it's focused on the digital divide. I'm traveling to 4 different parts of the world and spending time with infrastructure providers and what they're doing to drive inclusion, sustainability, and economic prosperity for folks all around the world. But with that, I'd like to start with our online participants. Marit, why don't we start with you, and can you provide a brief introduction and what you're focused on?
Yes, hello everybody. I hope you hear me well, and
we do.
So glad to be able to take part, even if only online. So my name is Marit Palovirta, Senior Director of Regulatory Affairs from ETNO. And for those of you who don't know us, so ETNO is the trade association representing the largest telecom operators in Europe. And just to give you an idea in terms of investment, so our members invest about 70% of all fixed and mobile investments across the European market. So there you go, Will.
Thank you, Marie.
Look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. It's going to be a great discussion. Daniel, you're up next.
Thank you. I'm really sorry not to be with you today. I absolutely adore Riga and the whole Baltics, and it's such a wonderful time in winter to be there as someone from Canada and Switzerland. But I run Sky's EU office in European affairs in Brussels. Sky is obviously a telecom company, a technology company, a content company, a distributor, and a streamer and broadcaster. But I'm here today on behalf of the European VOD Coalition, so representing the streaming sector in Europe, and the VOD Coalition membership covers a lot of the global, regional, and local players, and it's to really talk about the streaming sector. And while I'm at it, just a small plug, because Sky is about to launch in the Baltics as a joint venture with Sky Showtime with NBCU and Paramount. So very soon you'll actually also be able to see what we do directly, and it's also relevant for this debate because it's one of the services that may end up being in scope. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Daniel. Apparently you're an F1 driver as well, it looks like. And Philip.
Yes, hi everybody. Again, hope you can hear me loud and clear. My name is Philip Malak. I am Director of Economic Policy at Meta. All the services you know that we offer as a company, Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, and also now with our progression into the metaverse as well and our Quest products as we move forward. As I say, I'm Director of Economic Policy, so I have a lot of focus on types of economic regulation, mainly focused in Europe, but also now looking wider, of course, into some other areas. Before I joined Meta, I spent 15 years in the telecoms industry, a former colleague of Marit as well. I spent nearly 8 years on the board of Etno and 2 of them as the chairman of the board as well. So this is a topic which has an air of familiarity. Thanks.
Thanks, Philip. And last but not least, Juris, why don't you introduce yourself? And I understand you have a few slides you'd like to review as well.
Yeah, thank you, Will. My name is Juris Binde. I'm president and CEO of Latvian mobile telephone company, the leading mobile operator in Latvia. We are operating for more than 30 years. I'm also professor of Vidzemes University of Applied Sciences, working on socio-technological modeling for different purposes. In my previous life, I started as an engineer in the manufacturing, in the radio electronic equipment production. Therefore, I have quite broad experience in different areas. For today's discussions, I prepared some visualization for the topic, and because it's always easier to understand the problem if you are showing the structure and showing the interconnection between different elements of this system. So, in fact, the current problem, what we are discussing, is discussions about the ecosystem. The ecosystem, which consists of 3 main parts. These are, first of all, end users, our customers who are using everything what is available from the virtual environment. There are telco operators who are delivering and creating the environment in order to deliver any content to the end user. And there are OTTs, the source of information, source of content, and they are selling their products through the network. So at the same time, there are several flows in this system. One of the flows is content flow, which is moving from OTTs through network to the end users. The second flow is the cash flow, which is going from end users who are, in most cases, are making the payments for the content. In some cases, it's directly to OTTs. In some cases, they are using telco operators for the transit. And OTTs are receiving this money. The main cash flow is basically between these 2 elements. At the same time, the telco operators have to invest a lot of money in order to keep the technological environment in a good quality, in a good capacity, in order to ensure the transmission speeds and all other technical parameters. But the cash flow is, in most cases, is passing operators, or if not passing, then a very, very small part of the commission is falling into the development. And this is a problem which have to be solved, because in the future, if this kind of business model will continue, the telco operators will not be able to invest enough capital investments into the network and technology development, which will be resulted into the decrease of quality of the services for both OTTs, for whom it will be very difficult to deliver their content in the good quality, and also end users will be not satisfied because they will not receive the product or services what they are expecting. Therefore, in order to keep this infrastructure in the good shape, we need to change the business model, and we see on these graphs that the calculated average growth rate during 6 years increased for the traffic by 23%. It's a huge volume, which is basically not seen, but which requires a lot of investments in order to keep the necessary quality. And approximately 50%, even more, slightly more, of this traffic is generated by the OTTs. We have to live with this ecosystem if we want to have a good quality, and if we will destroy this ecosystem with a wrong business model, most probably we will also destroy ourselves. And there is also another example that the destroying of the rainforest for economic gain is like burning a Renaissance painting to cook the meal. So therefore, one more element which is in this ecosystem is the regulatory environment, and it's very much depending on the smart decisions and balanced decisions in order to keep this ecosystem alive and developing. Thanks.
Thank you, Juris. Thank you. And that's a nice segue into the first topic that we're going to discuss. Let me also mention, too, that during the course of our panel, if you have any questions, I believe there's a mechanism for you to submit that, and Val's going to moderate that, and hopefully we'll have about 10 minutes or so towards the end of our session to answer those. But, you know, and Juris, there's no doubt that, the mobile network operators spend billions of dollars, billions of euros on both investing in the infrastructure and the licensed spectrum to deploy, as an example, next generation networks like 5G. And so the challenge really is how to balance that investment, allow the mobile network operators to be able to recoup that investment, monetize that investment, while allowing the OTTs to continue what they do best, which is innovating new services and that sort of thing. But there definitely needs to be a balance there. So what I'd like to do, Murray, let me hand the virtual mic over to you, and would love to hear your perspective on, Juris did a pretty good job of kind of describing LMT's perspective, but would love to get your perspective on this, on the general problem to be solved.
All right, thanks very much. So indeed, I think Juris gave a good overview of the digital ecosystem, or the connectivity ecosystem, if you like. So I will not repeat that. But I mean, what we see, maybe by way of background, what we see is that there are kind of few different parallel dynamics that are currently, that have been ongoing in the digital ecosystem in Europe for a while now. And one certainly is the data traffic volumes and the exponential increase of these traffic volumes that we don't really see the end of. And of course, it is also clear, as also Juris mentioned, that the traffic seems to be more and more concentrated, coming to a few global content generators. And then if you look at the way that the traffic is routed in the networks, and the way that it kind of comes from the international connectivity infrastructure towards the national markets in Europe, we do see also that there is some asymmetry in the IP interconnection practices. So these have typically been commercial negotiations, especially when it's peering agreements between larger players, larger companies, such as operators, and also the larger content providers. But we do see that there is unbalance in the negotiation power. And certainly this is becoming then an issue when telecom operators need to all the time, of course, invest and expand and redimension their networks to accommodate the increasing data traffic. And also, as Juris mentioned, that there is kind of a shift in the role of the content generators as well. So we are seeing now the emergence of proprietary infrastructures such as the CDNs and caches appearing also in the European markets, which of course allows these players to bring their services closer to the end user's location. But there we start then having the question as well that, well, you know, maybe these companies are no longer just the mere kind of internet end user as they've been largely considered to be, but perhaps they should also be then considered clearly as an ISP's customer. And finally, maybe to raise also the regulatory asymmetry. So many of you know that ISPs, our sector, is still subject to intrusive regulatory framework, and this includes elements of pricing, competition policy, open internet regulations, etc. And we do not see, of course, the same kind of restraint to innovation and investment on the content generators. And just to be clear, we're not even calling for this kind of same kind of restraint, but just to share with you that there is clearly an asymmetry there. So then if you think about it, that, well, what does this mean for us, the ISPs? Well, the data traffic as such, of course, is a good thing. We want more data and services and applications out there. And yes, it is part of the operator's job to deliver this to the end user. But then when you add this kind of commercial asymmetry that we perceive and also the regulatory asymmetry, it doesn't really seem fair from our perspective. So really, we see that some of the large content generators are extracting enormous value from the internet connectivity, which is pretty much free for them to use, and can even then complement this through multi-sided business models, whereas the traditional telecommunications sector and the business model that is prevailing doesn't really allow us to monetize the investments that our members are making in the networks. So this is where then, you know, we believe that maybe this is the good moment to start exploring new business models and how does all of this add up when we are talking about the larger connectivity ecosystem, but also then all the political targets that we have specifically in Europe, so the digital decade targets and all these other good things. So I hope that gave you a bit of a flavor from our side where we are with this.
It certainly does, Marit. And, you know, from my perspective, you know, you kind of talk about the analogy I use, the David and Goliath, right? And, you know, we're gonna shift Philip to you and talk about Meta in a moment. But I think, you know, regulation can bring that balance. But so Philip, would love to hear from your perspective, from Meta's perspective, how you weigh in here.
Yeah, thanks, Will. I mean, if I can, I mean, I'll just start with two or three initial points. I think we've heard from Marit and from Juris some quite broad and relatively sort of unspecified problem statements about sort of sustainability of the ecosystem and these other things. I think, you know, in our view, this is clearly a symbiotic ecosystem in that content and application providers provide the services which telco customers, ISP's customers, wish to consume. It is their decision to go out and consume these products and services. And I think one thing missing from Juris' slide and conversation also is that these customers pay a subscription fee to these services as well, in which they are then a subscriber. And it does generate significant revenue for European telecoms operators as the business model to charge end users for their either mobile or fixed broadband connections. Also, we noticed quite a strengthening of a lot of European telcos' financial results in the last few quarters. GSMA's own recent study, which is the Mobile Outlook report, also referenced that they're seeing trends which they refer to, for example, as price firming, which means that the prices of European telecom services in some cases are stabilizing, if not going up in some areas as well. So I think the kind of doomsday scenario sometimes that is played out here is not exactly the clearest picture to be basing a lot of these assumptions on. You know, and on the symbiotic relationship that exists here, I mean, let's be honest here, no one pays for a 5G connection to see the logo set in the top corner of their phone. They don't pay for a fiber connection at home to have the flashing light go faster on the router. They pay for it because companies like Daniels, for example, offer very innovative ways of consuming video content. They pay for it because they like to use Instagram and other ones. So the fact is, for me, example, living here in Brussels, I mean, I've just had a recent conversation with Proximus about upgrading to fiber at my home. The entire upsell is based on my ability to stream Disney Plus. That is the case being made as to why you would invest or you would pay a higher subscription fee for telecom services. And we see that case across Europe as well, a lot of collaboration between operators such as Vodafone as well with things like YouTube Premium, Amazon Prime. So there is this symbiotic relationship which drives the ecosystem, as we say, forward in many ways. And also, as I say, from spending a number of years in the industry myself, along with, looking at Latvia, for example, as a market as well, I have not worked in there for a few years, but I have been surprised by the sort of view that the situation of the industry has accelerated so rapidly over the last 3 years to be in such a poor place, that such a significant intervention as this would be one which would resolve some of the issues at hand. I mean, I think we fully accept that there is issues in the European telecoms market, be that, as you mentioned, Will, spectrum licensing issues, which have been around for as long as I've been around, probably. Issues around the rollout of fiber infrastructure. Can we get better in terms of reducing the cost in terms of running out fiber infrastructure? And these kinds of issues, which are all abound, which will probably have a more impactful development on the European telecom sector, than it will be pursuing some of these measures. I think to pick up on one of Marit's points as well, absolutely, companies like Meta and other digital companies do invest significantly in infrastructure and in Europe to ensure that quality to end users, and also to ensure that we make the load on operators' networks and something that's manageable. We continue to innovate in this space as well. Meta has just released from its AI research center a new codec which compresses MP3 voice, for example. That's a 10 times compression based on what's there today. And we have released that open source as well. So this continues to be an evolution of our innovation, especially around network technology, because it makes sense for everybody to have more efficient networks and more efficient services, because you're correct, people are consuming more high quality services. Analysis Mason just pointed that between 2011 and 2021, content and application providers in Europe invested 183 billion euros in the development of digital infrastructure in Europe. This is a significant investment, not just for our own purpose as well. This delivers enormous savings also for European telecoms operators, approaching €1 billion for European ISPs. And also, as Marit mentioned as well, we cache a lot of services. We have numerous caches there in Latvia as well, also to make the service more efficient for Latvian users. And so I think this is very much a symbiotic relationship which has evolved positively, delivering strong consumer welfare benefits over a significant period of time. I'll just reference us back to the European regulators as well. I think BEREC recently was pretty emphatic in its view on the assessment of the problem statement here. I think we often get told that this was the wrong questions and it was the wrong answers, but their analysis of the situation, that there is no free rider problem in the EU markets, was pretty clear, I think, and I think that's just another organization which has pointed to this fact. I'll just end on a final note as well, because Marit did mention the EU's digital decade goals. Absolutely, the digital decade goals have pretty extensive and very ambitious goals when it comes to connectivity. They also have a number of other goals which are hugely important, shouldn't be forgotten in this context, around cloud take-up. It's around the digitalization of small businesses in Europe as well. So from our perspective, adding some kind of tax, levy, fee, or cost into this environment would probably be not so wise if you're looking at that side of the equation as well. Well, I'll just leave my comments there, but very happy to engage in the debate as we go forward.
No, great perspective there, Philip. And I'll also mention kudos to Facebook and its early involvement with the Telecom Infra project and what Facebook was doing to help bridge the digital divide, which is a very passionate topic that's on my mind, and one of the reasons why I'm writing that book. But Daniel, let's move to you and allow you to weigh in here. I think Philip made a really good point. People don't subscribe for 5G services because it's the next G. It's about content, and what you do has revolutionized the way that we consume content.
That's right. And to be honest, I've actually never seen 5G on my phone, and so far I've actually been just fine. But I do look forward to it. So yes, so if you look at the streaming sector, we would always have used the example of the cooperation between content and internet service providers, mobile operators, as a big success story, because we have worked together. People take the connections to view their content, like I do. I'm what you'd call a super consumer. So I have 7 different streaming subscriptions and a huge monthly internet bill, which I'm happy to pay. That's also why often our streaming services are bundled with your telecom subscription, because there's such a strong link. But I think, you know, we still haven't actually gotten to the problem, because if it's about commercial asymmetry, most of the VOD coalition members are negotiating with the telecom incumbents, and they are a fraction of the size of the telecom incumbents. They pay for the peering, they pay for the interconnection, and on top of that, almost every single coalition member is investing in the CDNs and caching to deliver the content directly to our consumers in a way that is both beneficial to the consumers and to the networks. So I'm still, to be honest, not completely clear on what the problem is, because commercial asymmetry would be more competition law, more DMA, an imbalance of power. We're focusing on maybe a few of the global companies that are really, really, really big. But then if Marit is talking about national level, a lot of the streaming companies and a lot of other companies in other sectors are actually responsible for quite a bit of the streaming compared to some of the other companies. And so our problem is very loosely defined. I'm not sure what the problem is. Barrick was very clear, as Phil said, that there's no free riding. And the wider you take it, the more unclear it is. You know, what is an OTT for this debate? Is it just you know, a couple of the big global companies that we're all customers of? Is it streaming? Is it social media? A lot of these companies, like a lot of the VOD coalition members, are investing so much already. So I do think that there has been a lot of growth the past few years, but it's also clear that that growth is not ever going to be at that level again, and that nothing that we've seen so far from any of the studies has shown how creating some new fee or tax, or basically what is a cross subsidization of one part of the internet ecosystem for another, is going to help meet any of the targets. What it sounds like more is that you're trying to tax the future to pay for the past, as someone else said. And we still don't quite understand, as a streaming sector, why that would be, when, you know, in many cases, a lot of the investment isn't about traffic, it's about the initial investment in things. A lot of the companies that are asking for new money have also put out absolutely glowing shareholder reports stating that investment in new infrastructure is happening as fast as possible. Money is not the issue, hence why dividends should be so large to the shareholders on the telecom side. So again, the problematic is where I struggle a little bit, because what I worry about, what the streaming sector worries about, to be honest, is that we create some new tax or fees, or this whole sending party pays issue. We've seen that in South Korea, it's been absolutely disastrous. There's absolutely no benefit there. And our worry ultimately, in a time of economic crisis for consumers, is that the consumer will pay. So if you're having to pay additional fees through a cloud provider that you're using, if you're having to pay because people are using your service, if you're having to pay because you've invested in a CDN and now the CDN has to pay as well, and then you're already paying for your subscription and you're already paying for a very high bandwidth connection, then the consumer is basically going to end up quintuple paying for the same thing that they have today for no benefit. And if we do that, then companies like the streaming companies that offer subscription services that are quite easy to change compared to a telecom subscription will end up suffering immensely, and then the whole ecosystem will start to crumble, because if you have less content, less subscriptions, then why would you get your high bandwidth connection? And so I think that the argument is actually going in the other way. And I almost jokingly want to say that it should be the incumbents that pay us content companies for our content, because once you get into this debate, it can go in almost any direction. And ultimately, what we want is we do not want the consumers to suffer, and we just don't actually see a problem, because things work and companies are already paying when it's needed. And I'd really like to discuss who would qualify, how it would work a little bit, because we just don't see a sustainable way to create this, especially if you look at how complex the system is, how to actually tell whose content is whose without going into some fairly intrusive monitoring of content that I don't think anyone would want. I'll stop there. I hope I've thrown out a few interesting and provocative questions to both the other speakers and the audience.
You certainly have accomplished that, Daniel. So, I think from my perspective, as I sort of look at this broadly, there are concerns around these new application loads that not only the mobile network operators are potentially putting on the networks, but also new services that the mobile network operators are delivering. I mean, certainly private networking, especially in the enterprise for manufacturing automation, is huge. We will get to network slicing, but 5G has tremendous superpowers with ultra low latency, with massive device support, with increased security. That's really going to unlock and unbirth a whole set of use cases. But I think we've all sort of discussed that there are things that are being put in place, content delivery networks, caching, to ensure that we don't overload these next generation networks that the LMTs of the world are building. But with that said, I really want to get in, because as we get into the last 10 minutes of the panel, I want to talk about the regulatory role. And from my perspective, and this is a U.S. statement, typically when the federal government across the pond would get involved, it would mire things down. But I'm wondering, is there a way that we can approach this through regulation that actually can spur and drive innovation? In Eurus, I'd like to start with you on that.
Yeah, of course, the regulation is a very important issue, but I would like to touch a little bit on the technological issues which were started. First of all, the customer charging is more and more shifting from the monthly fees to the flat rate. It means that there are not so big variable costs for the network if the network is built. And it doesn't matter how much bytes you are sending over the network. Of course, there is another limitation, is congestion. And coming back to this pandemic issue, in Latvia, our networks are with a quite good capacity reserve. And during the pandemics, we survived very well, and many of activities were switched to the virtual environment, and it works very well. However, I know that in many countries it was a complete disaster, and many economical issues were practically stopped. Another issue is that 5G is basically industrial network. Therefore, expectations that 5G will be mainly used for the OTTs network and content providing are not so well grounded, because you already mentioned these all technological features like network slicing, private networks, and so on. If the big enterprises will order the private network on the 5G technology, most probably the operators will spend their efforts on this issue in order to get money directly from the customer, big corporate customer, neither to try to develop consumers market where the OTTs are delivering their content. Therefore, it will be regulated not by the external some regulator, but it will be regulated by the market dynamics, and market dynamics will directly show the corporate direction.
Yeah, good point. Daniel, you touched on something. It's like, how do you even define an OTT, right? I mean, so I think before you can go to the next step and even entertain, some sort of regulation, you've got to define that. So, what else do you think about, beyond that, which is that's a huge thing you have to get over, right? I mean, are there any other considerations where maybe some balance of regulation could spur innovation and, to Marit's point, kind of level the playing field, between the Goliaths and the Davids of the world?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. And I mean, the key point that I'd say, and this is, for the VOD sector, but for almost any company, is we all need and want and support a strong telecom sector in Europe. That's very, very clear. And we're actually looking into all kinds of other ways that we can help support the sector, including regulatory ways, because it is heavily regulated. And maybe there are some ways to liberalize a little bit, to give a little bit of extra help to the sector. What we think is dangerous is if you use regulation to sort of pick favorites and to have one part of the sector pay for another in what is, in essence, almost an artificial way to boost a part or to penalize a part. If it is done just looking at the really, really big ones, then I worry, frankly, this is a personal point, but I worry that it'll start a trade war, which no one wants. And then if you start getting down into the detail, then you end up having problems around scope, around how you actually check, and regulation should not be going into telling then people for payment purposes to be monitoring some of these things. I would say, however, on congestion and on regulation, one of the things that we've seen from the content side for many years is that a lot of the congestion on the networks is also linked to piracy of content. So one way to deal with it with regulation is, in many countries, peak hours, 30% or so of content of traffic is piracy. If you tackle piracy through regulation, maybe you remove some of your congestion problem. That is one thing. But there are ways to give some regulatory relief to the telecom sector that does not then hurt the rest of the internet ecosystem. And we will be very supportive of any of those ways that then have a net positive for everyone, because that's what I think we should all be looking at.
I agree. So as we begin to close, Marit, final thoughts on this subject?
Yes, absolutely. So I think 5G, I mean, it's a great enabler for new services and applications, but one thing remains the same, that it will require investment to make sure that our networks are resilient and adaptable to the new traffic and all these new services. And when we talk about 5G, we should also bear in mind, of course, that 5G implies, let's say, convergence between mobile and fixed worlds. So there is, when you have 5G, you will always need also the fiber backhaul. So we should really consider this as a rather a connectivity ecosystem. And if you then also add, let's say, virtualization of networks there and the edge cloud developments that we are seeing now to start happening, I think there's also room for other players. And we've certainly seen also content providers entering already the space of connectivity based on the edge cloud and starting to provide connectivity solutions based on 5G. So I think that's there are lots of opportunities in 5G for, of course, operators, but also for other large stakeholders in the connectivity sphere. And when we talk about regulation, so we should really take into account the full ecosystem and think about what is there today, what is the future, and does it all play out well in the connectivity ecosystem? Is it a balanced way? Does everybody, have a kind of sustainable business model there? Of course, it's a free world, so we don't need to regulate that to death, but we should make sure that in the ecosystem, every player has a let's say level playing field, so that we can then continue to develop this together going forward.
Yeah, and you make an excellent point. Fiber is really requisite for that backhaul, for those mobile 5G services. And at least in the US, what we're seeing emerge as the killer 5G use case, at least for consumer, is fixed wireless access. And who would have thought, given that? But as we close, Philip, would love to hear your thoughts here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Will. And I'll try and be brief because I know we're coming towards the end. I think Europe's investment in fiber, especially very high capacity networks, has actually been moving on great guns. I think the European Electronic Communications Code brought in a huge swathe of alternative investors into the market as well. And that's really driven fiber investment across Europe. I think Eurus made a really, really important point here about industrial use cases. I mean, I think as we look for the future and everything like sort of automated driving, for example, a recent study by Siemens pointed to the fact that an autonomous vehicle could be producing as much as 1.4 terabytes of data every hour. And so if we're really looking to the future and the sustainability of networks, it would probably be wise to have other companies around the table discussing this, given that, as Eurus pointed to, there is a strong industrial case for growth. But I just don't think it'd be enormously politically expedient to be asking large European industrial players to pay for telecoms networks as well. So I think, perhaps that limits where we can go. On the regulation side, big agreement with Daniel. I think the European telecom sector, there is obviously clear and quite heavy regulation. I disagree strongly with the fact that there's an imbalance in the regulatory playing field. I think when we look at the recent DMA and DSA regulation, that's a very extensive regulatory rule book that will lay over the digital ecosystem in Europe. I don't think there is this imbalance in the ecosystem that's being pointed to in terms of regulatory oversight. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind when we look at this discussion if we're relying on this notion of imbalance. But yeah, I'd be very happy to discuss further in another occasion about how we can look at the evolution of European telecoms regulation to move us forward in this debate and this discussion, because I feel we're kind of, as Daniel pointed to in the problem statement, a bit of an impasse here.
Yeah. I mean, I think we could talk about this for probably the next 3 or 4 hours if we wanted to, right? But with that, I want to thank all of the panelists. This has been a great conversation, very provocative. I think we've heard lots of different perspectives here, and it's been really, really insightful for me personally. So, Val, I want to hand it back over to you. Do we have any questions from the online and offline audiences?
Yeah, we have, as you can see. But before you go with the question, or two, as we can see here in the audience, there's a poll on the platform which asks, should the most traffic-intensive platforms contribute to network infrastructural costs? So that's the question also for the audience, not only for the panelists to discuss, as we've heard already, which was the most intensive part of the discussion. So there's only 2 ways to go. It's yes or no. Should the most traffic-intensive platforms contribute to network infrastructure costs? And once you have voted, you will see the result at the moment. So let's have a question.
My name is John Strand from Strand Consult. I love to watch a debate by non-enlightened people about something they've not been looking into in details. I'm sorry to say there's no one in the world which have done more research in this subject than my company. Go to our website, strandconsult.dk. First mistake, Korea is not a disaster. These fair cost recovery have been in place since 2016. Google, Facebook, and Netflix have record high financial results in Korea. Korea is #1 broadband market in the world with 86% of the household have access to fiber to the home. And it's the highest 5G market in the world. 47% of the Korean people are using 5G. The highest number in Europe is 22%. So there's no evidence. This is a story which big tech companies have invented in Europe. Going back to the caches, look at the caches. You have multiple caches, one for each of the big tech companies. There's no reusing of it. So basically, this is expensive on an investment side, and it's also expensive of energy side, okay? This is basically, again, a misunderstanding. The debate in Europe is totally derailed compared to what we see in Korea and the US, because Ethno did a shitty report, and Barrick did even a worse report based on that one. And basically, if you put shit into a debate, you get shit out. And I think it's very important to have facts on the table. Go to our website, and please, if you're capable to find any factual mistakes what we are saying, please let me know. Thank you.
That's what we call a debate.
We were missing our other panelist. So.
Anyone to address this one? No?
I
Right.
think I think
Okay.
I think you dropped the virtual mic on that one.
This is Dean Bubbly again. I'll give it actually a question. I believe that our video participants are logged in via the platform on Zoom, which is a customer of AWS. Who is generating the traffic? Is it Zoom? Is it Amazon? Is it the 5G Techritory organizers? Or is it the speakers, including Etno? Who's responsible for the traffic?
All right.
That is a very good question. I think Daniel has raised his hand.
Yes, and it's a fantastic question. It goes back to what I was trying to say about understanding the problematic. I won't respond to the previous speaker just because he basically tried to, I guess, insult everyone except for himself. And that's not very helpful, but that's exactly the point. So how do you tell? And how do you tell without perhaps doing deep packet inspection? And, you know, how do you figure out who's going to try to pass it on and how many people are going to try to pass on fees to whom? And that is why we really need to have such a clear impact assessment into all the options, into the technological feasibility of this. Because I completely agree with this question. You create such a complicated situation, probably huge costs for everyone, and I still don't quite see then what the benefit would be. And the reality is, you know, even if you limit any kind of proposal to only a few really big companies, everyone is a client of those companies. All the other B2B relationships, you trickle down into that question with literally every use of the online ecosystem. So that is a great question. But the reality is, I don't think anyone's come close to an answer.
Yeah. I'll open that up to the other panelists. Any further comment? Okay, Marie, why don't we go to you?
Yeah, but just to say that indeed it's an ecosystem, and I think that's why I also mentioned the word connectivity ecosystem, digital ecosystem many times, because it's not, and we shouldn't be looking at who is the responsible here. I don't think we are even looking for a guilty party. We're looking for a solution. We're looking for a solution so that we could have a balanced ecosystem in Europe that indeed, I think the end beneficiaries, they should be, of course, the first priority to have good content and connectivity to the end user. But we need to have an ecosystem around it that actually works then for those stakeholders who are part of that ecosystem. And I do agree that work needs to go into analyzing the bigger picture, as I already said. And I think that, well, BEREC put out a report. We thought that that was rather looking at the current situation and the past, rather than then trying to forecast and project into the future. What do we expect in the 5 to 10 years? Yeah. We have connectivity targets in the 5 to 10 years, so we need to kind of project into the future and do some thinking there. Not saying it's an easy task, but I think that we need to continue on this track. And as also Philip said, we need to continue discussing this issue.
Sure. I think, Philip, you wanted to weigh in as well.
Yeah, thanks, Dean. I think it's a really important question to try and understand that type of dynamic that goes on in the market. I mean, I chose to be here today, right? Because this is important to me and I get a lot of value from discussing and debating with everybody here today. So I'd say I'm responsible for my decision to log on to Zoom and dial into the service today and make my points heard. So I think, as our previous speakers told, how do you attribute varieties or slices or percentages of that? Who knows? And I think consultants may spend years trying to demystify these types of things. But yeah, let's put it as it is. Most of these services that are being used throughout Europe, it's the consumers who are driving that through their demand to utilize these services.
Well, with that, I think we're at our time. Val?
Yeah, just if suddenly there is anything left to add to Oscar's question, are there any considerations when building infrastructure financing models that would facilitate development, operation of networks in a sustainable way? Are there any considerations when we are building these infrastructure financing models? Anything to add on this if you, get the idea?
I don't, but yours, do you have any final thoughts there?
In fact, we have to divide two technologies. One is for the fixed networks, another one for the mobile networks, because the physical nature of these two networks is completely different. And we also have to consider this social component, because people more and more are using smart devices to receive the content and to watch or to listen or whatever they are doing on the free move. And it's a huge difference between the fixed network, when the TV set is like a fireplace for the tribe, which when everybody from the family are gathering together, and the individual smart devices which are used at any time, everywhere, and from the different sources. Therefore, the congestion of the mobile networks is much more complicated problem, because the technological and physical limitations for the mobile network are they are very realistic. We cannot ignore physical rules of physics. And the frequency range band and other issues, they are putting the limits. And if we want to increase the capacity in one area, we have to put extra base stations with extra frequencies to use frequency allocation and other technologies in order to make this environment wide enough. If there is a congestion of the people, at the same time they are creating the congestion in the network. So it's quite complicated social technological issue.
Yeah. You know, and I think all of the panelists spoke to this. It's about ecosystem and cooperation and balance. And, you know, I think, you know, the future is very bright, but we've got to continue moving in that direction. So with that, Val, I think we're wrapped up.
Yeah. Thank you, panelists, and thank you, Will.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.